Hermione Granger and the Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 3. The Levitating Tent. Perhaps the Grangers should have consulted a few books on camping before traveling the nearly 4 hours to the forest of Dean in Gloucestershire. Camping isn't that hard, exclaimed Bert as they loaded up the station wagon with all of their supplies. The hardest part will be putting up the tent. It wasn't very often Bert Granger was wrong, but when he was wrong, he was very, very wrong. First of all, the Grangers nearly didn't even make it to their campsite. Heavy rains had made the dirt roads a river of mud, and the 10-year-old station wagon wasn't going anywhere. Like a scene out of a movie, Bert and Hermione got out of the car and started to push as Mary revved the engine. Almost like magic, Bert ended up covered in mud, while Hermione only had a few specks here and there. Finally, they arrived at their campsite and started the arduous task of emptying the car and tackling the tent. Hermione immediately pulled out the instruction sheet to study its various diagrams and instructions, with Mary looking over her shoulder. In an uncharacteristic move, Bert decided to attack the tent without looking at the directions. In a flurry of poles and stakes, Bert somehow wrapped himself in the dull green fabric of the tent and fell flat on his face in a mud puddle. Hermione and Mary's laughs ran through the valley, and Bert had to admit it was the best sound he had heard his entire life. His heart seemed to grow in his chest, which would have been a great thing had it not set him off balance again and back, face down, in the mud. Eventually, the tent was erected, albeit slightly leaning to the left, with 3 poles still on the ground. Mary and Hermione took to setting up the sleeping mats and sleeping bags in the tent, while Bert tended to his mud-ridden clothing in the nearby creek. Unfortunately, none of them noticed the various woodland creatures scurrying amongst their bags of food, until a rather chubby squirrel, clearly an expert at foraging for food from oblivious campers, scurried over Hermione's feet as she knelt in the tent entrance. With a gasp of surprise, Hermione whirled around on her knees and grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on, a tent pole. She pointed it at the squirrel, who had frozen at the commotion. Both Hermione and the squirrel stared each other down, unmoving except for their rapidly beating hearts, until the squirrel noticed it had dropped a piece of food a few inches away. As squirrels are not known for their attention span, it made a move toward the crumb. Hermione didn't really want to hit the furry animal with a stick. She only wanted to scare it away, but as it came back towards her, she hadn't noticed the bit of food still near her foot. Hermione started waving the pole about wildly. "Get away!" she screamed. "Get away from me!" As if by magic, the squirrel levitated slightly above the ground, comically trying to swing back towards the crumb. Startled at the sight, Hermione dropped the tent pole and screamed. As it clattered to the ground, the squirrel immediately followed the rules of gravity again and fell with a splat back at Hermione's feet. It heaved forward, grabbed the crumb, and scampered as quickly as it could back into the cover of the trees. "What happened?" Mary gasped as she fought her way out of the tent. The whole fiasco took only seconds, but Hermione felt as though everything had been in slow motion. "That squirrel!" she started, trying to make sense of the levitating squirrel that had just been at her feet moments before. It, well, even Hermione knew the truth of what had happened couldn't have actually happened. Surely it was just a trick of the light. Sure, she was able to make the pages in her book turn, but even she knew that was probably just the wind. She had to have been mistaken. "It crawled all over my legs and startled me, that's all," she finished, resigning herself to the fact she did not in fact see what she thought she had seen. "Oh no, look at the food bag," Mary exclaimed as they both rushed over to see what food they could salvage from the rummaged-through bags. Neither of them seemed to have noticed the very stern-looking tabby cat watching from the tree line. It sat as still as possible, staring at Hermione as she helped her mother clean up the food from the ground. That night, after a warm and delightful campfire complete with stories and laughter, the Grangers shuffled off to the loop-sided tent and called it a night. Before zipping up, Bert made the wise decision to cover the tent with a plastic tarp. They had heard distant rumbles of thunder as the evening went on, and he didn't want to chance the tent getting damp. With the storm that was brewing directly to their west, however, there was no chance the tent would just get damp. It was going to get soaked through. As the torrential rain clouds made their way to the forest of Dean and filled the creek beds past their capacities, the Grangers were absolutely oblivious to the dangers they were slipping through. As the water continued to rise, threatening to wash away their campsite, a very peculiar thing started to happen. Slowly, the tent stakes eased themselves out of the ground. Just as the water crested and started to breach the campsite, the tent carefully rose in the air out of the way. It hovered in mid-air. Science and reason would say it was being blown by the gale force winds, though the tent strangely wasn't moving horizontally at all. All it did was hover over the raging water while its occupants blissfully unaware of the danger a few meters below them. There seemed to be an invisible waterproof bubble repelling the rain. The tabby cat looked on from the branches of a high tree with a smug look on her face, if that is at all possible. The Grangers awoke to the sound of birds singing and the soft light of the sun streaming through the canvas tent. As Bert unzipped the tent, he was startled at the scene laid out before him. The campsite was completely unrecognizable. Debris was scattered everywhere, and the ground around the tent was saturated with water. "Must have had a hell of a storm last night," he exclaimed. "Glad I put these stakes in so tightly," he said as he checked the tent stakes out of curiosity. They gave absolutely no resistance as he pulled them out of the mud. Bert frowned in confusion, but his analysis of the tent stakes was interrupted by the rest of his family emerging from the tent. "Strange," Mary said. "We all must have slept through it." "Very strange indeed," said Bert. "Well, I for one do not want to be a walking mud man again. How about we clean up and head back home? We can stop in Birmingham on our way back and stay overnight so you can check out the science museum you've wanted to go to, Hermione. Is that okay?" As they packed up the supplies, the tabby cat watched Hermione intently. The cat's emerald green eyes followed her every move. Just as the lovely little family was about to get into the station wagon, the cat realized they had forgotten a pair of tongs near the campfire. With a quick but powerful leap, the cat landed just behind the tongs and let out a long, loud meow. Hermione glanced back at the sound and noticed both the cat and the tongs. "Wait, Mom," she said. "Look at the cute little cat. And she has our tongs." Hermione walked slowly over as to not scare the cat. Though she didn't have worried, the cat was completely unintimidated by her presence. "Thank you, Kitty," Hermione said, stooping down to pet the cat gingerly on its head. The cat purred in reply, and Hermione stood back, tongs in hand. "Mom, can we keep her? She's so sweet." Before Mary could say no, the cat leapt into the safety of the trees and out of sight.